So just shout with any questions if anything's not clear as we're going along. Hopefully a bit more time to experiment if you have any devices with you, or just talk a bit more as well. So how did Kudos come about? What are we trying to do? We'd all come from the scholarly information world, and we're, hi, come on in, grab seats. We're only just starting, so you haven't missed anything. We'd all come from a world where there was increasing amounts of information being published, and that's difficult when you're both the reader trying to keep up with all of that information, and when you're publishing your own work and you want to make sure that it is found and read, and that it's visible to the right people and applied by the right people. But that's something that becomes increasingly hard to do the more information there is out there. And in terms then of people trying to get to grips with that, when we started thinking about Kudos, it coincided with the rise of social media, and people asked us a lot. We were all sort of consulting with libraries and publishers, and we were always being asked which social media channels should people use to promote research, and there's no simple answer to that question. It so much depends on where your community is and indeed what you're going to find easiest to use. And it became obvious to us that actually it would be helpful if people's use of different types of communication channels, so email and social media and things like that, could be measured and compared, so that you could start to have a more concrete answer to that question and be able to say to people, actually for somebody at your career level or in your subject area, this is probably the most appropriate way for you to try and talk about your research. So lots of different ways to communicate and lots of question marks around how best to do that. And then at the same time, we were seeing this rise of different ways of measuring the outputs of research, and a growing focus on this from governments and policymakers, and therefore from institutions, and a growing ability for researchers to find out for themselves how much is my work being read or downloaded or cited or talked about online. And there's been a movement called the altmetric movement that some of you might be familiar, which tries to track and measure the amount that your work is talked about in social media or on Wikipedia, or in government policy or in the traditional press. And so there's been a real growth in different types of information, different types of interest in work being measured, and all of that happening at a much more granular level. So whereas metrics around research all used to be focused on the publication level, so if you published in a journal, you were very interested in the impact factor in some subject areas, but that was at the journal level. It didn't really reflect how widely your work was being read or having impact. Now these newer metrics are really starting to look at that work by work level of impact or level of interest in your work. So that's really the environment in which we sort of thought there could be ways to put some of these things together. What if we could bring together lots of different metrics to help you look at them all together and understand how your work was performing or how they were changing? What if we could help you measure the effect of different communication channels on those metrics and help you understand how communicating in different places was more or less effective on the metrics you're interested in? And all of that could also then help you to cut through the noise. With so much research being published, the more you know about what's an effective way to communicate it, the better a job you can do of helping it find its audience. So we're really focused on helping researchers make their work stand out, and helping institutions participate in that too. Another aspect of what we've been trying to do is provide a platform for people to explain work in plain language, because there are so many different audiences, and the formal nature of publication at the moment tends to encourage people to write in a very formal academic language, which is appropriate in some contexts, but if you want to make sure that your work is found and read and applied by that wider audience, there needs to be something in between the work and that audience. You need to explain it so that they can understand it. So we've tried to set up a place that you can do that as well. So it's about explaining your work, about sharing it, and about measuring the effect of all of that so you can keep learning what's working, what do I need to do more of, what can I do less of, because you obviously don't have masses of time for communicating your work, so the more efficient we can help you make that, the better you can use your time, the more you can focus on doing the research. And we talked to a lot of people, as you can imagine. About 3 years ago when we were setting this up, we did lots of studies and surveys among researchers, and one of the most common messages was people saying, I know I should do more to try and get my work out there, but I don't know where to start, I don't feel confident. And for me that's a really important point, that there are people who are very confident about using social media and other communications channels to get their work out there, and that's great, but we don't want research quality to be judged by how good people are at social media. We need to make sure that everybody has access to the same kinds of tools for getting their work out there, and the same kind of support and guidance, so that even the people who feel less confident can make the most of their work and not be put at a disadvantage. And so that's what we've tried to set up with Kudos, is a service to do that, to level the playing field, to provide people with guidance, with tools, and with the ability to be better supported by their publishers and by institutions and funders and societies as well. So we're trying to provide a central place for people to manage the communications around their research. And as I said, it comes down to these 3 main actions: explaining your work in plain language, sharing it however you choose to do that. We aren't a communications channel, we're not a network, but we're a place from which you can manage whichever networks you do choose. And then we bring all together all the metrics to help you measure that. And I'll show examples of that in a moment. Some of the key points about what we're trying to be: we want to be an independent system, so we work across lots of different publishers. To use Kudos for your work, it just has to have a Crossref DOI, and David touched a little bit on some of the plumbing of scholarly communications there. If you don't know what that is, the team here will be able to help explain that to you. But if you've had work that's been published, you'll often see that it has a DOI, an identifier, which is a string of letters and numbers that is uniquely identifying your work. And if your work has that, then you can typically find it in our system. You don't need to know that number to find it, but it means that we'll be able to find it on your behalf. And that means that we can find your work wherever you've published it across about 5,000 publishers. So you don't have to use a different system for all the different places that you publish. You can do the same thing for all your work in one place. And as I said, we're also making it work across all the different places that you might communicate. So we're not saying you've got to use social media. We're saying whether you prefer to use email, whether you like academic networks, whether you do use social media, even if you prefer to just have conferences and handouts, we give you a trackable link for your sharing that you can use both on and offline in all of those different places, and then it uniquely enables you to measure the effect of that sharing. So we're trying to be as agnostic as possible and not force you to do any particular kind of communication, but just help you to measure whatever you do. And then we bring in all the different metrics, again, so that you don't have to go and dig those up from different sources. You don't have to know who the providers are of download data for your work, or citation data, or altmetric data about the attention it's getting in Wikipedia and social media and things. We're bringing all of that together and mapping it against your communications, so that you should, after you've used Kudos, be able to say, great, I sent out a posting on Tuesday, and by Wednesday 40 more people had looked at my work. And it should be as simple as that for you to see cause and effect, and simple as that to know which kinds of things are really helping more people find and read your work. We launched coming up to 2 years ago. It was May 2014, and I should remember that because my son was born at the same time, so my website is as old as my son. And we have 75,000 researchers using the system now, and they come from across the whole spectrum. They come from around the world, as you can see. They come from all different career levels, which is interesting. I think we thought maybe we'd find lots of early career researchers using this, but actually lots of professors have signed up too. So the nature of the system is equally popular for people, no matter how successful they've already been in their academic career. And across lots of different subject areas. There is, in our current numbers, sign-up numbers, there is a bias towards people in the medical and chemical sciences because our earliest partners were publishers in those areas. But the more we work with more publishers and more institutions, the more that is balancing out, and we're seeing lots of growth in the arts and humanities and social sciences. And it does work. It's a really simple idea to encourage people to explain work and share it more. Does then encourage or enable more people to find it and download it. And one of our publishers did some analysis in 2014 and discovered that about 3 times more people had downloaded articles where the authors had used Kudos. So it's a simple thing, but it does work. And we've been lucky to win some lovely awards from library and publishing industry. We have a lot of publishers. As I said, actually you can use this system for up to 5,000 publishers, but about 50 are working with us directly, and that means that they provide some better data, so you get more metrics if the publisher is working with us, and they will notify you as an author of one of their authors that they have started working with us. So you might get you might hear more about us if you've published with one of these, and you might get a slightly better experience of using our system if your publisher is working with us. And as you can see, they're also across all different subject areas and all types and sizes of publishers. Lots of open access publishers, but also lots of subscription publishers too. Everybody's interested in making sure that work gets more widely found and read. And last year we started working with institutions as well. And I'll talk a little bit in a moment about the nature of how we work with institutions. But again, institutions all around the world have signed up to work with us in all different subject areas and all different types and sizes and different types of research profile as well. So it's an exciting time. Lots of people are supporting us as we grow. So what does it look like if you're a researcher coming to sign up? I've put some postcards out at the front, so do take one of those at the end, and that will give you the basic information you need to have a go yourself. But let's have a look at what happens when you do. So the first thing is that you find your publication and you create a page for it. Now, some of the information on this page, this bit in just under the first line, that is what we pull in from our partner Crossref. So that is the official title, the list of the authors, information about the journal in which it's published, and the DOI. I don't know how legible that is, but that's an example of the identifier for the work. What we encourage you to then add to that basic information is a shorter alternative title. Now in this case, Ali's a researcher here at Brunel. His title is actually quite legible, uses relatively comprehensible words anyway, so he's actually just given it the same title. Quite often we see people whose original title of the work is written in very dense technical language, and here's an opportunity to just summarise that much more simply. Another example that we see, particularly in the humanities, is where people have picked a chapter from a book, and the book chapter doesn't really have a title of its own, so it's never going to get found, whereas here they can add a title that explains what that chapter's about. So you get this kind of alternative title field, so that if you feel that the original title of the work maybe isn't the kind of words that people will be searching for, you can add an alternative. And then more importantly, perhaps down here, you can add 2 statements: what's it about and why is it important? And we deliberately phrase those in very plain language to encourage people to write a very plain language description. And so here he's saying, basically, this paper is important because it examines patterns in insider trading and looks at whether people prefer to do insider trading on any particular day of the week or the month, and looks at whether we can explain those kinds of patterns because of things like calendar anomalies. So he's boiled down quite a complex topic and quite an interesting and rigorous detailed study into that really simple statement. Basically, we're looking at insider trading and whether people do it on any particular day of the week, which makes it so much more accessible to people at all different levels. If you're not a specialist, but you might find it interesting to understand the work that's been done there, it might have some bearing on work that you're doing, you're more likely to find that work if you're just searching for insider trading rather than some of the more technical language that Ali might have used in his original work. If you're even within the field and you do understand the language of the field, it's quite, as you will know, quite time consuming to skim and scan through all the literature in your field, all written in quite dense long form. If you've just got those quick 2-line, 3-line, 4-line summaries of each piece of work, it's much quicker to skim those and start to kind of triage your reading and be able to say, now these 5 things I might be interested in, now I'll read the abstract, yes, these 3 are definitely interesting, and now I'll read the full text. So it's a way of adding a simpler layer on top of the formal literature and making it much easier to skim and scan through, even if you are an expert in the field. But if you're not, if you're in a different field, or if you're even outside academia in the business world, there might be ways that you can apply this research. This really helps you to understand it. And of course, if you've taken the time and trouble to publish your work open access, you might particularly want to ensure that that broader audience can understand it, because you've gone to such lengths to make it available to more people. Let's also make sure that they can understand it. Also on the publication page and further down, you get this field called perspectives, and this is really nice. What's it about and why is it important are specific to that piece of work. The perspective is much more the author's own viewpoint. So these are agreed by all the authors together, or whichever one gets there first. They just write one statement, but here all the authors can add a different perspective. So it might explain your role in the work, or your general interest in the field, or maybe it will, people often use this to talk about some of the colleagues they've worked with over the years. There's some really nice personal stories that come out, which is brilliant if you're trying to engage a broader audience. If you're the PR and comms team and you want to try and pitch the institution's research to the media, these stories that come out are so much more interesting in grabbing the attention of a journalist or the general public. You get these sort of much more human voices coming through. So that's a really valuable addition to have your researchers adding that for their work as a matter of routine, rather than that being something you have to go and seek out in each case. It's here and waiting for you. And then on the right hand side, you can add links to anything. So this is a really useful way to bring together in one hub all the different resources you might have created during the work. So you might have data or slides, videos, you might have code, or you might want to link people off to ongoing work that you're doing in this area. If they've been interested in your work, perhaps they could go and participate if you're doing certain kinds of work. So you can link to anything. And across all of these fields, a real advantage is that they can be updated over and over again. So this is not a version of record like it is on the publisher site. This is a fluid piece of text to describe the ongoing importance of your work. So we see people updating why is it important, because the field has moved on and they want to recast how their work fits. And we certainly see people adding links to things that have only appeared after the work has been published, because in this case, for example, she did this fantastic project where she discovered that baboons are nice to each other in the morning because they know they're going to be grumpier later on, and they're storing up goodwill. So she obviously attracted a lot of attention with that piece of work. And so post-publication, she added all the links to her radio interviews and her TV interviews. Naturally, she's very proud of that, but also for her institution, that is gold dust in terms of tracking the ongoing discussion around the work and ultimately the impact that the work has had. So it's a bit like a light impact tracker. It's a place for anybody, indeed the author and the institution, to track related materials that show how the work has gone on to be used, or just help to support people's understanding of it. And then there's the sharing piece. And as I said, the key thing here is that we're a hub from which you can manage sharing however you do it. So if you have social media accounts, you can connect those, you can authorize Kudos to post directly into them from here, but you can also just generate a trackable link and post it out anywhere, so by email or onto a blog or into an academic network, all the different places that you might already communicate. Just do it with this trackable link, and now you'll start to have real insight into which of those places is actually resulting in higher readership for your work. So here you can see he's shared his work by Twitter. That Google URL is the trackable link that we've generated for him. Here's another example with the jump URL, and he's starting to be able to see then from our metrics tab all the different metrics that we're bringing together. So he's done one share, 39 people have clicked on that link, 27 have viewed that page on Kudos, 1 has gone through to read the full text. So far the altmetric score is 1, but he's got 3 citations in Web of Science. And as far as I know, that's quite unique as a place to bring together all of those different metrics and give you an at-a-glance look at how that particular work is doing, tying it not only to the publication metrics, but also to your efforts to communicate it.
Charlotte, can I ask a question? When it says shares, is that shares across all those social channels that you kind of link up?
That's any shares that we have been able to track. So if there were a number of times shared, maybe 3, because it might have been Facebook and Twitter and email, then we would, in this particular view, all of that is combined together as shares, views from those shares.
May I ask you a question? How do you trace email?
Because you generate that trackable link and then paste it into your email.
All right, so the email messages include that link.
Yeah,
Okay.
so you take that link and you post it into email. So you don't have to send the email through our system.
Right.
We thought people would be quite uncomfortable because we're so little and unknown. We didn't want to make it something that people had to add all their precious contact data into. So you just take the link and send it normally through email. And then what we also do is map it on a timeline so that you can see here is an A for an action, and in this case the action was sending out a tweet, and immediately the number of views, that's Kudos views in purple, has gone up. Number of views on the publisher site has also gone up. So we not only combine them all together in a row like that, but we also map them on a graph so that you can really see when I did something and what effect it had.
Can I just ask, with the shares, and if that contains like Facebook and Twitter and emails, is there a way of breaking that down to see maybe your audience, you hit it more if you go via Facebook rather than
Yes. So we're just finishing off the development work on that actually to also track within it not only how many overall, but where did they come from, and we'll start
so
to
you might want to put your efforts into
exactly, yeah. Yeah, and it already does that because some people actually generate different links for each of those. So it kind of does that already, but now we're also working out how to show you if you just took one link and shared it in different places. So we'll be able to show you that as well. And it's great, again, because obviously researchers will use lots of systems like Facebook and will obviously use email, but at an institutional level, there's no visibility of that. So being able to track it all through one system means now your institution knows that you've put all that effort into sharing your work and can support it if it's done in a public place, but can also understand how effective it was. They can't see your communications in Facebook or email, but they can see whether it worked and then tell other researchers, oh, now actually people are having most success by email. So it's a whole new layer of insight and support. And as you can see, when the publisher works with us, we add further data to these graphs, so that orange line there is the full text downloads on the publisher site. So the more data we can bring together from different sources, the more we map it onto graphs to show you how your actions affected it. And this is a favourite example of mine. We see these quite often where the work was published, let's say about here, and grew in its usage and then sort of plateaued out after the first kind of few months. Because the author then a bit later on did something in Kudos, suddenly the usage took off again and actually, I think, tripled over time. So a really exciting evidence of how little efforts to explain and show your work can have a really big effect on the metrics that matter. And we're often asked, why then? Why would I use Kudos? How does it differ? So one answer to that is that you might already be very actively sharing your work, email, social, academic networks and so on. And you might already be aware of the different metrics for measuring how well your work is doing. What you can't do in any other way is map the two together, or you could do it, but it would take a lot of time and effort in gathering data. So we're doing that work for you. So Kudos is unique because it puts together what you did to communicate it with what effect that had and shows you that all mapped out neatly. And there's no other system that can currently do that for you across all the range of places that we're doing it. You get a dashboard for your work, so every publication that you've added to your account comes out in a list, and it shows you whether or not you've explained them, shows you if you've shared them, and then brings all those metrics together for all of your publications in one dashboard as well. So that's useful again, because you can start to see, when I have put some effort into explaining and sharing, I do get better numbers. So it's all about giving you the evidence to help you decide what's worth doing with your time. And it doesn't take a lot of time. This is really typical timestamp of about 15 minutes to add those basic explaining fields, to share it out. And as we found in our early research, that is really worthwhile. If you're going to have spent probably years or months doing the work and getting it published, it's worth spending another 15 minutes to make sure that it actually gets out there and gets found and read. So this is what it all boils down to for us, is giving you that reward, I guess, for a short amount of time. We're showing you really how worthwhile it is to put some effort into this. And it's easy. People have found it easy to use the site, and they like the fact that it pulls lots of things together in one place. So this isn't a difficult system to get to grips with. It takes people maybe 5 minutes to sign up, and then 15 minutes to find and work on your first publication. So I'll stop there for a moment. Any questions?
So unlike academia or ResearchGate, your profile is not public on this. Is that right? And it's instead that you have to share stuff out to the world?
You do have a profile on here, and it is open.
Okay.
We haven't focused on making it a browsable place to find other academics,
Right.
because there are so many sites already doing that. So we've focused more on it being a toolkit for managing your presence on other sites. But you do have a public presence on here, and if you want to, you can send people the URL for that, and they can look you up here as much as they'd look you up anywhere else.
Just because obviously with academia, actually last night there was a kind of backlash against academia. I don't know if you saw it on social media, because they've started to send emails out to people saying, pay us money and we'll boost your profile on there. So a number of people decided to delete their academia accounts. There was a hashtag going around
I
last
didn't
night.
see that. Thanks for sharing that.
So it was interesting as a kind of potential alternative. This might be
Yeah.
useful.
There are a lot of ways in which we're trying not to do what they do, either because they do it well or because we're slightly dubious about the ethics of how they do it. And we don't want to have a system that sends people a lot of emails like ResearchGate does. We don't want it to be based on researchers having to pay us, which is increasingly the direction that academia is taking. And obviously we don't want it to be based on people having to upload full text of their work that might be in contravention of their copyright agreement. So we don't load any full text here, we just link to it, which is probably the most substantial difference, but also we're not trying to be a networking site.
Yeah, and also the link to metrics is nice as well, because you don't, on academia, for example, you get the kind of information from them, people who download it from them directly, but you don't get kind of altmetrics because they just don't allow that kind of
Exactly, and they do, and same with ResearchGate, the ResearchGate score, it's all based on just what's happened in that little walled garden, which isn't really what you want to achieve in research. You don't only want to try and communicate with people in one closed community. So yeah, we've very much tried to be as open as possible in every respect. Any more questions?
Do you see like this kind of outreach, altmetrics, etc.? Is that for you more about reaching your academic networks, or about like wider engagement, societal impact, that sort of thing?
I don't think anybody in the altmetric movement has really figured that out yet. It's very interesting. At first, when they launched the altmetric movement, they were very interested to see whether there was a correlation between altmetrics and citations, and some analysis there, but nothing conclusive yet. But now, as a movement, they seem to be saying, actually, we don't expect there to be correlation there, and we're not very interested in whether or not there is, because it's more about trying to reach a wider audience, or it's more about just trying to quantify other kinds of attention. So whether or not there's a correlation with citations isn't helpful. So as a movement, I think they do anticipate being able to track and measure impact more broadly. But for example, a researcher at Simon Fraser University in Canada had instigated just a quick little Twitter-based auto-tweeting thing where anybody that tweeted a DOI about their work, they got an auto-response from him saying basically, are you an academic or not? Because he was just trying to see whether people tweeting about work were within or beyond academia. And it was, when I last saw him, it was a thing he was just trying, so I'll have to follow up with him and see what his results were. But it was a not very scientific way to do it, but it was an interesting having a go, because that is the big question for everybody. You know, if we want to increase the reach of work, sure, we have to explain it for different audiences. We also have to find the right channels for reaching them, and it's not clear yet whether social media explicitly enables that. I mean, I think when you think about it logically, people are at the centre of the best possible network for being interested in their work academically. Are they at the best possible? Are they at the centre of the best possible network for people who might be interested in their work beyond academia? Less certain. It sort of depends on what happens virally. If one of their contacts retweets it, who is very well connected to industry, let's say, it's going to find its way through. But there's certainly an element of serendipity there. So I think there's a lot more research and analysis to do.
I think that's what's really interesting to me is you have the social tools that say are more private, perhaps like LinkedIn or ResearchGate, and the more public things like Twitter. So whilst you're perhaps not able to see the nuances of who's engaging with it, you have these different social tools which are targeted at different ways of working, perhaps, but you can see that in the, perhaps reflected in some of the scores you're getting. You might have a massive Twitter score,
exactly,
smaller other platform score, which might have some indications as to who your work is reaching.
Exactly, yeah, and it's important. You just have to look at that in the round, and you have to not only look through the lens of the altmetric providers who are doing a great job of capturing lots of sources, but there will always be dark sources that they can't track. So that's why we're trying to go in from the other end and look at what researchers are doing in terms of the email or postings to closed channels like Facebook, because that needs to be part of your understanding of it too. You can track the effect of things on one end, but you also need to track what's gone in at the other end. And I think we're the only people trying to do the going in end at the moment.
Are you able to track follow-ons? So, from what David said, you're going to really extend it. So, because it looks like you can certainly track where the academic tweets or posts or whatever, but are you then able to follow to track the click-throughs, as it were? So see, and how far can you track that?
So it depends on track and the definition of track. So we can count how many times that link has clicked on, however far it's gone. If you actually want to see the journey it's taken, then what you can do is, I don't know if I've got a, for example here on the logs for each piece, it will say view tweet, and in the institutional reports you'll get the links to all the tweets, and from there you'll go into Twitter, and then Twitter will show you this is when it was tweeted and by whom and how. So we can connect you to that information and we can count that information. What I don't think the Twitter API allows is for us to report sort of in abstract on the mechanics of that. So we wouldn't be able to show you 3 clicks and 2 retweets, and because that information isn't put into the Twitter API for us to pull back. But if you follow our link to Twitter, it's there and you can see it. So you can track it, you can count it by our system, and you can track it in the sense of following the path.
Okay. The other thing is it likely that you're going to be able to get the authorization to work with LinkedIn?
Possibly. We haven't actually pushed too hard at LinkedIn yet because it hasn't been one. So it's one of the ones that people can authorise, and we don't see much use of people authorising it at the moment. But we can, because they do that at the moment and post to it, we can already track if they're using LinkedIn and what effect that has. We just don't have any additional data back from LinkedIn. But if we see lots of usage of that, we can pursue that a bit more. Is it something that you see good usage of here?
Not here, no, but doing a lot of LinkedIn comm strategy, and we've created something that's quite interesting. So I'm just curious about that type of thing.
We could follow up about that.
On the profile for a paper, for example, you said about connecting the links to like the data, and you've got that DOI for that paper. Is it somewhere where you could put actually the DOI for a data set and have that description of why it's important for actually a data set
Yes.
as well?
And if the data, some data has a Crossref DOI, so you can even upload it into Kudos in its own right, as
Yes,
its
that's
own
what- yeah.
entity. Yeah. A lot of data will not have a Crossref DOI or have a data site DOI, which is a different minter of DOIs. And we're looking now at how we can incorporate them so that you could also make that a primary object in Kudos rather than it having to be a secondary object. But if it is connected to a work, even as a secondary object, it can now go in there, and you can add its DOI, and you can add a description of its importance, so that's still going to make it more findable. But yeah, we're doing some work to essentially remove our current dependence on Crossref and enable you to add any work, whether or not it has an identifier or if it has an identifier from another source.
Can I just say, this looks very much like it's a broadcast approach. Are you able to track receiver approaches? So, for example, this is an academic putting effort in to broadcast their work. What happens if, for example, on the impact side, people start to voluntarily find them through Google Scholar or whatever it might be? Do you then track that type of, these are the independent views that have come as a result of zero action on your part?
Oh, interesting. I think so. The altmetric service would do that a little bit, depending on the sources. Do you know about them and their donuts?
I know about the donuts because I eat a lot of them.
So one of our partners is altmetric.com, and they scan many different social media sites. I've lost count of which ones and how many, but also other sources like government documents and Wikipedia, as I say, and traditional media. So they are also looking for attention around academic work, and they're also in part looking for the DOIs that we're looking for, but I think they also have other ways of identifying when it's an academic work being talked about in those contexts. So they're tracking that, and that's why we bring that data in. Wrong way. So this is the altmetric donut, and in many cases that will be a much higher score there. They have a way of weighting.
Not always. Not always.
Well, no, not always, yeah. So they're obviously trying to add up the and somehow quantify the level of interest in the work. But they will do that. So that is not an altmetric score based on this action. You can see when there's a correlation between one of our actions and an increase in that score, but that score is increasing organically for all those other reasons when other actions are happening to generate interest in the work.
Can I just, there's some semantics that maybe you could help me with. You've talked about attention, impact, discoverability. What's the difference between those?
I think the definitions are very fluid, right? So there's impact in the sense of, you know, a clinical outcome changing.
Yeah.
There's impact in the sense of a policy recommendation based on that work. Then there's publication impact in the sense of citations, and the altmetric piece often gets sort of tied into that sort of sense of publication impact. So that isn't real world impact, maybe that's academic impact or certainly publication impact. The people behind altmetrics have started talking about attention rather than impact because they recognise that what they're tracking is now broader. It's interesting too, but they're shying away from calling it impact per se. And then other aspects of what we're doing is designed to increase discoverability. Now, you can't have impact without discoverability, but they aren't synonymous. Only a subset of what is discovered will ultimately lead to impact. So, yeah, I guess it's almost a spectrum from discovery through attention to impact, and it's like a filter, I guess, a funnel.
So would you view this as I don't know what you would call it, but an academic version of Hootsuite or something?
Yeah, we often use exactly that phrase, actually. Yeah, and I never know whether to use that because I don't know how many people would know about Hootsuite. But yeah, we're trying to help you manage lots of communications in one place and measure the effect of them. So what it then looks like from the researcher perspective, I don't know that we've really got time to go through it step by step together, but it's not a difficult site to use. You register, and there's even a Brunel specific URL, but if you take one of the postcards and go to our generic URL, you can just choose Brunel from the drop-down list of institutions. And then my top tip, if you try this out as a researcher, is not to focus in the first step on finding everything you've ever published, because that's always a bit time consuming. And what we often find is people come in and spend 20 minutes looking for everything they've ever published, and then they don't have time to do anything else. And it comes back a little bit to what you were saying. This isn't designed to be a profile site, so people aren't going to find your profile here organically. It doesn't matter if your profile doesn't list everything in the first instance. So find one thing. Maybe it's your most recent publication, maybe it's an older one that you want to draw attention to, or something that's newly topical. Find a publication, go in and add the explanation. Just keep thinking about your audience as you write in plain language. Just keep thinking. Imagine that you're getting an MBE and the Queen says, "What do you do?" And how you would explain to her what your work is in the 30 seconds you have with the Queen. That's probably the level to think at as a starting point, because then you are really going to articulate things in a much plainer language than you might otherwise use. And then do the sharing piece, get your trackable link, send it out, and then come back a day or two later to see what's happened to your metrics. And that's my suggested way of getting started. Just try it for one thing. It will take you 15 minutes. Hopefully you'll then come back a couple of days later and see that it's worked, and then that's going to be worth more of your time ongoing. Now, I mentioned a few times that we're also working at the institutional level. And the idea for that is that we can surface your efforts to the institution and they can support them more. So if you're tweeting about your work, the institution can retweet what you've done and respond and reply and so on. Help you get the word out beyond the people that you do know. Brunel can be one of your ways of getting out a little bit more virally. We also have showcase pages that institutions can set up. So if you do a really good job of explaining your work in plain language, it might get onto a showcase page at the institutional level, and it will get some extra discoverability that way. It's also helpful if your institution can draw up the knowledge from all of the individual researchers and start to understand at a higher level which of these approaches is best for explaining work and getting it out there, because then all the information and support and guidance that the institution makes available and provides to people can be more evidence-based and can learn from the activities that people are actually doing. And then hopefully all this, as I say, the guidance that you already give around tools and metrics and explaining a lot of the stuff that we've covered today can be targeted and directed more towards the things that Brunel sees are proving successful for you as researchers. So to be clear, it's all happening in abstract. The institution is not able to see your emails or see your Facebook postings, but it can learn from them and it can support them and it can amplify them, and that's why we've put this institutional layer in. And at the institutional level, they'd have a dashboard, so you get your own dashboard with how many people are active and how many publications that they explained and shared. It shows you who's been doing things, what publications they've been doing it to, and it actually brings in their tweets so that it's really quick and easy for you at an institutional level to like them and retweet them and so on. And then behind that dashboard, there's a whole lot of reports, I think about 20 or 30 reports now, that go into more detail about the kinds of activities, what kinds of success have been achieved, which metrics are changing, and that kind of thing. And there's lots of questions that can help answer. Oh, one of my graphics has gone missing. But it can help the institution learn which publications are attracting attention. So if there's a press office able to get out there and talk about your work more publicly, this will help them to know, oh, that's interesting, the author of that work posted about it, and it's obviously got a lot of people looking at it. Perhaps we should do a press release as well. So again, it might support the researcher in getting more visibility for the work, and it will help in that guidance around which networks should you use when you have questions like that. The institution will be better able to answer them, and you'll be able to see the efforts of your colleagues, learn from them, and be inspired by them. And the institution can have more support levels around them. And that's an example of one of our partners have put together a showcase for the publications that their researchers have explained. So just put a bit of branding around the edges of that, and that's something they've just been able to set up with a couple of links and a couple of images through our system. So it's a very light way of showcasing research. A lot of our partners are using that as a sort of interim measure while more complex and time-consuming projects take place internally to build places like this. This is just something you can set up in, again, about 10 minutes. And I think I mentioned this, that all the text that you create in Kudos can be pulled back into the repository, or in this case it's on the publisher's site. So when you create that as a researcher, you retain the copyright, you grant us a license to make that available under Creative Commons CC BY, and then we have a little HTML widget that can be dropped into any web page that will then display that information to people. So if they've gone to the publisher site, they can still read your simple explanations there too. So again, this is where we're not trying to be the profile site or the destination site, we're just the toolkit. We make that available, we send it out to other services like PubMed Central and things like that. So we're getting that information out there into the places that people already look at research.
Are you looking to work with some of the big CRIS vendors?
Yeah, we're talking
Yours
to the
and
three
Rapple.
main one there, and interestingly most of our pilot partners on the institutional side were with Pure, so that's probably where the conversation has advanced most. You haven't yet got one here, is that right?
We've got symplectic.
Oh, you've got symplectic, yeah, of course. Yeah,
There were ongoing discussions about symplectic versus pure versus.
yeah, quite.
Yeah.
But we have a really good relationship with digital science, actually. Obviously we work with altmetric, and so we talk a lot to symplectic as well. So.
Yes.
So yeah, kind of summing up really, what is Kudos about? It's not a network and profile site, but it helps you understand their effectiveness. It's not a metrics provider, but it brings lots of metrics together for you. It's not a content provider, but it helps you connect up all the different types of content you have. It's not a discovery service, but it does help make sure that work does get more widely found. It is a toolkit. It is about mapping together different sources of data to help you make decisions about your communications. And for the institution, it's really easy to set up, and it gives you lots of advantages in terms of supporting your researchers. It's connecting you with communications they're already doing. It's integrating you with materials that they've created and linked on our site. It's giving you that intelligence, and ultimately it's helping to increase the visibility